The first thing Walter Bennett ever asked me was whether I knew how to make coffee without ruining it. He was 81, recovering from a fall, and sitting at the head of a polished dining table large enough for a family that no longer gathered around it. I had been standing in his kitchen for less than 10 minutes. "I've been making coffee since I was 12, I told him. "That doesn't answer the question." I looked at him over my shoulder. He was thin but still broad through the shoulders, with silver hair combed neatly away from his face. Even in a robe and house slippers, he carried himself like the retired judge he was. His expression suggested that I was already on trial. "How do you take it?" I asked. "Black. No sugar." I said coffee, not dessert. That was the first time I made him laugh. It was also the beginning of the 6 most important years of my life. My name is Rachel Monroe. I was 37 when Walter died. Though most days, standing beside him, I felt older and younger at the same time. Older because caregiving has a way of filling your pockets with responsibilities no one else wants to carry. Younger because Walter never let me pretend I had all the answers. By the time I started working for him, I'd already spent 5 years caring for my own mother. She had passed away after a long illness, leaving me with a quiet apartment, a stack of medical bills, and the strange feeling that I no longer knew who I was when no one needed me. Home health care was supposed to be temporary. Walter was supposed to be another client. Neither of those things turned out to be true. His house sat outside Richmond, Virginia, at the end of a narrow road lined with old maples. It was a red brick home with white columns, tall windows, and a front porch Walter almost never used. The back garden was different. That was where the house still felt alive. His late wife, Margaret, had planted roses there for more than 30 years. Red ones, yellow ones, pale pink blossoms that bent toward the morning sun. Walter knew every variety by name. He could not remember where he had left his reading glasses, but he could tell me exactly which rosebush Margaret had planted the year their daughter graduated from college. I learned quickly that Walter did not like being helped. He liked being accompanied. There was a difference, so I never stood over him while he took his medication. I placed the pills beside his coffee and asked what he thought of the newspaper. I never told him he was too weak to walk to the garden. I walked beside him and matched my pace to his. I never spoke to doctors as though he were not in the room. That mattered to him. I think it mattered more than anything else I did. His daughter Caroline visited every few weeks, though she usually stayed less than an hour. She was 52, elegant, and always dressed as though someone might photograph her without warning. She ran several charity committees in the city and had a way of turning every sentence into an announcement. The first time I met her, she entered the kitchen while Walter and I were sharing a slice of peach pie. It was 11:30 in the morning. Caroline stopped in the doorway. "Dad, you know you're not supposed to eat that?" Walter continued chewing. She looked at me. "Rachel, is it?" "Yes. My father has blood sugar issues." "I'm aware." Her smile tightened. "Then why is he eating pie before lunch?" Walter placed his fork on the plate. "Because I asked for it." Caroline did not look at him. "I'm speaking to Rachel. And I'm speaking to you." The room became quiet. I reached for the plate, but Walter rested his hand beside it. Not on mine, just close enough to stop me. "Rachel knows more about my health than anyone in this family," he said. Caroline's face did not change. That was something she was very good at. She smiled, walked to the coffee machine, and began speaking about a fundraiser as though the moment had never happened. But I noticed the way she looked at me after that. Not like a caregiver, like an intruder. Later that afternoon, Walter and I went outside to check the roses. The air carried the first chill of fall, and several brown leaves had gathered along the stone path. Walter stopped beside the garden gate and removed a small brass key from his pocket. "Take this," he said. I looked at it, but did not reach for it. "What for?" "The garden. I already have the back door key. This one is different." The key was old, its edges worn smooth from years of use. "I don't need it," I said. "You will." I laughed softly. That sounds mysterious. I was a judge for 43 years. Mystery was usually just poor preparation. He held the key out again. This time I accepted it. "Keep it," he said. "Walter, this belongs to your family." His eyes moved toward the roses. Some things should belong to the person who remembers why they matter. I did not understand what he meant. At the time, I thought he was only talking about the garden. 3 weeks later, he asked me to call his attorney. When I asked why, Walter folded his newspaper and looked toward the empty chair across from him. "Because there are things my children believe they're entitled to," he said. He paused. "And things they have not earned." The first time Walter forgot my name, he apologized 3 times before breakfast. "I know who you are," he said quietly, staring into his coffee. "The name just slipped away for a second." "It happens," I answered. "No," he shook his head. "It happens to other people." There was no fear in his voice, only frustration. I pulled the newspaper closer and pointed to the crossword puzzle. "You still owe me an answer from yesterday." He frowned. "What answer?" 7 letters. A person who always tells the truth." He studied the page for a few seconds before writing carefully in the empty boxes. "Honest." Then he looked up with a small smile. "I suppose that's one way to test whether my brain still works." It passed. He nodded, but I noticed the relief in his eyes. Moments like that became more frequent over the following weeks. Walter wasn't losing himself. He was simply getting older. His doctor repeated the same thing after every appointment. His judgment is excellent. His memory has normal age-related lapses. He remains fully capable of making his own decisions. Walter always thanked the doctor. Then, once we reached the parking lot, he would joke that growing old felt like constantly being underestimated. "You know what's strange?" he asked one afternoon as I helped him into the car. "What?" "When I was a judge, people assumed I knew everything." He buckled his seatbelt. "Now they assume I know nothing." I laughed. "I think you're doing just fine." He looked out the window. "I'm doing fine because someone still treats me like I'm the same man." That stayed with me longer than I admitted. As autumn settled over Virginia, Walter became quieter. He still insisted on walking through Margaret's rose garden every morning, but he stopped lingering among the flowers. Instead, he simply stood there, looking, remembering. Some mornings, he spoke about his wife. Others, he said nothing at all. Silence didn't feel uncomfortable between us. It felt earned. His children called occasionally, mostly to say they were busy. Caroline was organizing another charity gala. Ethan was traveling for business. Both promised they would visit soon. Soon became another week, then another. One Thursday evening, Walter watched the front driveway from the living room window long after sunset. I pretended not to notice. Finally, he sighed. "I suppose something came up." I already knew Ethan wasn't coming. He had canceled 20 minutes earlier. Again. "He asked me to tell you he's sorry." Walter smiled politely. "He always is." There was no bitterness in his voice, only exhaustion. His health changed quickly after Thanksgiving. He became weaker. Walking required more effort. Reading tired him. Some afternoons he fell asleep halfway through old stories I'd already heard a dozen times. Each time he woke, he apologized. I always told him the stories were worth hearing again. Because they were. Not for the details, for the way his eyes lit up whenever he spoke about the life he had built with Margaret. One rainy afternoon, while the sound of water tapped gently against the windows, he asked me something unexpected. "Rachel." "Yes. Do you think kindness still matters?" He searched for the right words. "If nobody notices it?" I set my tea on the table. "It matters most then." He studied my face. "Why?" "Because that's the only time you know it's real." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled. "I hoped you'd say that." Walter passed away on a quiet Sunday morning. There were no dramatic final words, no speeches, no last-minute confessions. He asked me to open the curtains. He wanted to see the garden. The winter roses had already faded, leaving only bare branches waiting patiently for spring. "They'll bloom again," I said. "I know." He kept looking outside. "So will people." Those were the last words he ever spoke. A few minutes later, while soft morning light filled the room, he slipped away as peacefully as anyone could hope to. I sat beside him for a long time, not because I didn't know what to do, because leaving felt like ending a conversation I wasn't ready to finish. Caroline and Ethan arrived the following morning. They hugged each other. They cried. Then, almost immediately, they began asking practical questions. "Where are Dad's financial records?" Did he ever mention changing the will? Where are the house documents? The funeral home hadn't even arrived yet. I answered what I could and stayed out of their way. That afternoon, Caroline found me folding one of Walter's sweaters. "You won't need to do that anymore." Her tone was polite, almost rehearsed. "I know. We appreciate everything you've done." There was a pause. "My brother and I think it's probably best if you finish today." I folded the sweater carefully. "I was planning to." She glanced toward the hallway. "We'll also need every key to the house." Without arguing, I reached into my purse and placed the front door key on the table, then the garage key, then the side entrance key. Caroline counted them. "Is that everything?" I hesitated. My fingers brushed against the old brass key Walter had given me weeks earlier. "No," I said honestly. "There is one more." Her eyes narrowed. "Then I'll need that one too." I slowly closed my hand around it. "I'm sorry. It wasn't yours to give away. It wasn't yours to ask for." She stared at me. "What exactly does that mean?" I met her eyes for the first time since Walter died. "Your father gave me this key himself." Caroline crossed her arms. "Everything in this house belongs to his estate." I remembered Walter's voice as clearly as if he were standing beside me. Some things should belong to the person who remembers why they matter. I took a slow breath. "He told me to keep it." For a moment, Caroline said nothing. Then her expression hardened. "If that key opens anything valuable..." She stepped closer. "Keeping it could be considered theft." The room fell completely silent. For the first time since Walter's death, I realized this wasn't simply a grieving family. It was a family already preparing for a fight. I didn't sleep much the night after Caroline accused me of theft. Not because I was afraid of losing the brass key, because I couldn't stop hearing Walter's voice. "Keep it." He had never been careless with his words, especially not during those last few weeks. There had been intention behind everything he did. I just didn't understand it yet. By morning, the house no longer felt like the quiet home I had known for 6 years. It felt like strangers had moved in overnight. Walter's funeral was held 3 days later. He had requested something simple: no elaborate speeches, no expensive displays. Just family, close friends, and anyone who had genuinely shared his life. The church was full anyway. Former colleagues, neighbors, people whose cases he had judged decades earlier, veterans from the legal community, garden club friends who still remembered Margaret. As I walked inside, several people smiled warmly. They recognized me. To them, I wasn't simply the woman who brought Walter his medication. I was the person who had been beside him every day. Still, I chose a seat near the back. It felt appropriate. Walter's family belonged in the front. I didn't need anyone to notice me. The service was beautiful. The pastor spoke about justice, about humility, about living a life that left people better than you found them. I couldn't help thinking how perfectly that described Walter. When the final hymn ended, everyone slowly gathered outside beneath a cold, gray sky. Conversations began. Stories were exchanged. People laughed softly through their tears. Then I heard Caroline's voice. She was introducing me to a distant cousin. "Oh, this is Rachel." A polite smile. "Dad's caregiver." Nothing more. Not his friend. Not the woman who had spent thousands of mornings making sure he ate breakfast. Not the person who had stayed through hospital nights. Just the caregiver. The cousin nodded politely before turning back toward Caroline. The conversation continued without me. I stood there for another moment before quietly walking away. It shouldn't have hurt, but it did. Not because I needed recognition, because reducing 6 years to a job title somehow erased every quiet moment Walter and I had shared. I suddenly understood something. Love isn't always denied through cruelty. Sometimes it's denied through omission. After the funeral, I returned to Walter's house one last time, only to collect the few things that actually belonged to me: a sweater, my gardening gloves, a framed photograph of my mother that Walter insisted I keep in the kitchen because, as he once said, every house deserves someone smiling. When I arrived, I stopped in the hallway. Everything had changed. Family portraits had already been removed from the walls. Cabinets stood open. Drawers had been emptied. People were moving through the house carrying boxes. The place no longer felt like Walter lived there. It felt like people were searching for valuables. Caroline noticed me almost immediately. "Oh, good." She pointed toward the service entrance near the kitchen. "We packed your things." I looked outside. 3 cardboard boxes sat neatly beside the back door, in the same place delivery drivers usually left packages. For a second, I simply stared at them. 6 years, reduced to 3 boxes. "I could have packed them myself," I said quietly. "We didn't want to inconvenience you." She smiled again, that same polished smile, always pleasant, never warm. I carried the first box to my car, then the second. The third was heavier. As I lifted it, someone called my name. "Rachel." It was Ethan. I hadn't spoken to him alone in years. He leaned casually against the garage wall, hands in his pockets. "You have a minute?" "I suppose." He looked toward the house before lowering his voice. "I've been thinking." "About what?" "You worked with Dad every day." "Yes." "You probably noticed." He hesitated. His memory wasn't what it used to be. I looked at him carefully. It was better than most people his age. He smiled. "Come on." "I'm serious." He stepped closer. "The lawyer is going to ask questions. I imagine he will. It would help everyone if you simply acknowledged Dad was getting confused near the end." I felt something cold settle in my chest. He wasn't confused. I'm not saying he was all the time. His voice remained calm. "Just enough. I won't lie." He sighed, almost disappointed. "You haven't heard the rest. There doesn't need to be a rest." Then he said the sentence that changed everything. There'd be compensation. Compensation. He wasn't asking for honesty, he was trying to buy it. "I don't want your money." His expression hardened for the first time. "You should think carefully." "I already have." "You don't understand how these things work." "No?" I met his eyes. "I understand exactly how they work." For several long seconds, neither of us moved. Finally, he shrugged. "You know," he glanced toward the house, "people usually believe family." There it was, the quiet threat, not loud, not dramatic, simply stated as fact. Family, as though blood automatically made someone truthful. "As far as everyone else is concerned," Ethan continued, "you were just the caregiver." Just. The word landed harder than I expected. Not because it offended me, because Walter had spent years making sure I never felt like just anything. I turned without answering and walked toward my car. That evening, after unloading the boxes into my apartment, I began putting everything away. Most of it fit into one small closet. The house suddenly felt emptier than it ever had after my mother's death. I picked up my gardening gloves. Something crinkled inside one of them. Frowning, I reached into the glove and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was small, only a few inches across. Walter's handwriting covered the front. I recognized it immediately. Steady, deliberate. I unfolded the note. 5 words. Nothing more. "Please stay for the letter." I read them once. Then again. Then a third time. Walter hadn't left that note by accident. He had known. Known his children would push me away. Known I would consider walking away from everything. Known I might believe I no longer belonged there. I carefully folded the note and slipped it back into my pocket. For the first time since his death, I wasn't thinking about the house, or the inheritance, or even the accusations. I was thinking about one question. What had Walter written? That he wanted me there to hear. The estate attorney's office occupied the 2nd floor of a brick building overlooking Richmond's oldest courthouse. Walter had once joked that David Rosen refused to retire simply because he couldn't imagine anyone else organizing his filing cabinets. The office hadn't changed in decades. Dark wood shelves lined the walls. Leather-bound law books filled every empty space. A grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner, loud enough to remind everyone that time kept moving whether they were ready or not. I almost didn't go. Even after finding Walter's note, I sat in my car for nearly 15 minutes with the engine off. "Please stay for the letter." Those 5 words had carried me there, nothing else. I wasn't expecting anything. Certainly not money. Walter had paid me fairly for my work. He never owed me another thing. If he wanted me in that room, I trusted there was a reason. That was enough. David Rosen greeted me at the door himself. He looked exactly as I remembered him. Gray hair, perfect posture, a navy suit that somehow never seemed to wrinkle. His face softened when he saw me. "Rachel." "It's good to see you, Mr. Rosen." "It's David." He paused. "And Walter would have been disappointed if I forgot to tell you that." Despite everything, I smiled. He always corrected me. He corrected everyone. For the first time in days, something inside me felt lighter. Only for a moment. Caroline and Ethan were already seated in the conference room. Neither acknowledged me. The polished walnut table reflected the afternoon sunlight pouring through the windows. Folders had been placed neatly in front of every chair. There was one with my name on it. Caroline noticed. "I'm sorry," she said, looking toward David. "I think there's been a mistake." "There hasn't. This meeting is for family." David calmly removed his glasses. "This meeting is for everyone Mr. Bennett specifically requested." Caroline folded her arms. "Rachel was an employee." David met her eyes without raising his voice. "Your father disagreed." Silence settled over the room. The grandfather clock outside ticked once, twice, 3 times. No one spoke again. David opened the first folder. "As you know," he began, "Judge Bennett updated his estate plan several months before his passing." Caroline exchanged a quick glance with Ethan. Neither looked surprised. In fact, they almost looked confident. David continued. "The will has been properly witnessed, notarized, and reviewed by independent counsel." He paused only long enough to ensure everyone was listening. "Mr. Bennett remained fully competent at the time every document was signed." Caroline shifted slightly in her chair. "I don't think anyone questioned his competence." David looked toward her. "That is reassuring." I thought of Ethan's offer beside the garage. There'd be compensation. Apparently, that plan had already failed before it began. The reading itself started simply. Walter left personal keepsakes to longtime friends, his watch to a retired fellow judge, his military medals to a local veterans museum, Margaret's recipe collection to the church where she had volunteered for years. Each gift made perfect sense. Each reflected the man I had known. Then came the family. Caroline received several heirloom paintings and a trust that would provide annual income. Ethan received investment accounts placed under professional management. Neither inherited direct control over any significant property. Both frowned. Neither interrupted. Yet. David continued reading. The family residence. Caroline leaned forward almost imperceptibly. "Shall not be sold following my death." The room became noticeably still. Instead, the property would remain preserved under terms outlined in a separate document. Ethan finally spoke. "What separate document?" David calmly reached into a large envelope lying beside him. "This one." It was sealed with dark blue wax. Across the front, written in Walter's unmistakable handwriting, were only 6 words. "To be opened after my will." My heart began beating faster. Even Caroline looked uncertain now. David carefully broke the seal. Inside rested several handwritten pages. He unfolded them slowly, then looked around the room. Judge Bennett asked that this letter be read exactly as written. No summaries, no omissions, no interruptions. He began. "If you are hearing this letter," David read in Walter's voice, "then I have already had my last cup of coffee, complained about my roses one final time, and probably argued with someone over the proper way to prune them." A faint smile escaped me before I could stop it. Walter would have opened exactly that way. Even Caroline's expression softened for an instant. "If grief has brought you together today," the letter continued, "then I hope gratitude eventually keeps you together after I'm gone." David turned the page. People often assume a judge spends his life deciding who deserves punishment. They're wrong. Most of my career was spent deciding who could still be trusted. The room felt smaller. No one moved. Trust is never built through promises. It is built through ordinary days, through small kindnesses repeated until they become character. I lowered my eyes. Walter wasn't talking about money anymore. He was talking about life. Then David reached the next paragraph. His voice became quieter. "My children," Caroline straightened. Ethan folded his hands together. "I have loved you from the day each of you was born. Nothing written below changes that. Love, however, is not the same as approval. The silence became almost unbearable. Over the last 6 years. David looked briefly toward me before continuing. I discovered something difficult. Being surrounded by people is not the same as being cared for. Caroline's face slowly lost its color. Ethan stared at the table. Neither of them looked at me. David continued reading. Rachel never asked me for anything beyond permission to do her job. Yet she gave me things neither of my children realized I'd been missing. He turned another page. She protected my dignity when I could no longer button my own shirt without frustration. She argued with me when I skipped meals. She laughed at jokes that deserved no laughter. She remembered your mother's birthday every single year. Most importantly, David paused only because Walter himself had left a blank line before the final sentence. She stayed. No one breathed. The room had become so quiet that the ticking clock outside sounded impossibly loud. David slowly lowered the page. There is still one final section. No one interrupted him this time, not even Caroline, because whatever confidence they had brought into that room, it was already beginning to disappear. No one spoke. For several long seconds, the only sound in the room was the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. David looked down at the remaining pages before continuing. There is one final instruction, he said quietly. I'll finish the letter before addressing the estate. He unfolded the last pages. Walter's handwriting became slightly less steady near the end, but every word remained unmistakably his. If my children are wondering whether Rachel influenced these decisions, David paused only long enough to let the sentence settle. She did. Caroline's head snapped up. Ethan looked equally stunned. David continued before either of them could interrupt. She influenced them by doing something neither of you realized still mattered. She showed up. Another silence. She came on ordinary Tuesdays. On snowy mornings. On holidays. On afternoons when I wasn't pleasant company. She never stayed because she expected a reward. She stayed because she believed no one should grow old feeling forgotten. I lowered my eyes. Every memory returned at once. The crossword puzzles, the coffee, the hospital visits, the mornings in the rose garden. None of those moments had ever felt extraordinary. To Walter, they had been everything. David turned another page. Caroline. She sat perfectly still. You spent years organizing charity events for strangers. I was proud of that. I simply wished you had remembered that compassion also begins at home. Caroline's lips parted slightly. She looked as though she wanted to argue. Instead, she looked away. Ethan. His shoulders tightened. You always believed there would be more time. More birthdays, more visits, more conversations. Life rarely gives us more time. It only gives us today. No one in the room moved. Not even David. Walter's words seemed to belong to all of us now. Then came the paragraph that changed everything. For that reason, I have instructed David to establish the Margaret Bennett Foundation on my property. The house where your mother and I built our lives will become a residence for elderly people who have no family willing or able to care for them. Caroline blinked. Ethan leaned forward. David continued. The property shall never be sold. It shall never become a private investment. It shall never be divided among heirs. I heard Ethan whisper under his breath. No. David kept reading. Rachel Monroe will serve as the foundation's first executive director. She understands better than anyone what dignity looks like in old age. She has earned my confidence. She has earned this responsibility. I stared at David, convinced I had misunderstood. Executive director? Me. Walter had never mentioned anything like this. Not once. The letter continued. Rachel will also have the lifetime right to live in the gardener's cottage, should she choose to remain on the property. Not because she is owed a reward, but because every caretaker deserves a place where someone finally takes care of them. I felt tears gathering before I realized I was crying. Not because of the cottage, not because of the position. Because Walter had seen something in me I had never seen in myself. For years, I had believed I was simply doing my job. He had believed I was building a home. David folded the final page onto the table. The foundation has already been legally established. He opened another folder. Judge Bennett completed all necessary documents 6 months ago. Caroline found her voice first. This is absurd. David remained calm. Everything has been properly executed. My father would never leave his home to a stranger. He didn't. David's answer was immediate. He left it to a mission. She turned toward me. What did you tell him? Nothing. You expect me to believe that? I don't need you to. Her breathing became uneven. You manipulated an old man. I cared for him. You isolated him. I begged both of you to visit. That sentence escaped before I could stop it. The room fell silent again. Caroline stared at me. I continued quietly. I called you after every hospital appointment. I called when he fell. I called on Thanksgiving. I called before Christmas. I called because he missed you. My voice never rose. It didn't need to. I wasn't trying to keep you away. I was trying to bring you back. Caroline's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, I thought she might deny it. Instead, she said nothing, because she knew I was telling the truth. Ethan pushed back his chair. This can't be the end of it. It isn't, David replied. There are additional documents. Ethan looked relieved, until David continued. Judge Bennett anticipated legal challenges. He slid several folders across the table. Included here are medical evaluations from 3 independent specialists confirming his full mental capacity. Another folder, signed statements from neighbors. Another, video recordings made over several months discussing his wishes in detail. Another, every decision was documented. Every possible objection. Already answered. Walter had been a judge for more than 4 decades. He knew exactly how people challenged the truth. So, he had protected it long before anyone tried. Ethan slowly sat back down, for the first time since entering the room. Neither he nor Caroline had anything left to argue. Walter hadn't defeated them. He had simply made sure his voice would still be heard after he was gone. People often imagine justice as a loud moment, a courtroom verdict, a dramatic confession, someone finally getting exactly what they deserve. I've learned it usually arrives much more quietly. Sometimes. Justice sounds like silence, the kind that settles over a room after no one has any lies left to tell. That was the silence we left behind in David Rosen's office. No one argued anymore. No one threatened lawsuits. No one accused me of manipulation. Walter had anticipated every question before it could be asked. That was who he had always been. Prepared, patient, careful, even in death. The following weeks were unexpectedly peaceful. Caroline and Ethan challenged nothing. Their attorneys reviewed every document, every medical evaluation, every witness statement, every amendment, every recording. The answer was always the same. Walter had made every decision freely. There was nothing to overturn. The Margaret Bennett Foundation officially opened 3 months later. I almost declined the position, several times. I wasn't an executive. I wasn't a businesswoman. I was a caregiver. David smiled when I confessed those doubts. No, he said. You're exactly what Walter wanted. He believed organizations can hire administrators. They cannot hire character. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe he might be right. The gardener's cottage stood behind the main house. It was small, white shutters, a stone chimney, a porch barely large enough for 2 rocking chairs. Walter and Margaret had once used it for guests. Now it became my home. The first evening I slept there, I opened every window. The scent of roses drifted inside with the spring air for the first time since my mother's death. I didn't feel like I was merely surviving. I felt rooted. The foundation welcomed its first residents that summer. Mrs. Evelyn Carter arrived carrying only 2 suitcases and a sewing basket. Mr. Hernandez brought an old radio that played jazz every afternoon. Mrs. Wilson insisted on baking cornbread every Sunday, even when nobody asked. Little by little. The house filled with laughter again. Not the loud kind, the gentle kind, the kind Walter loved most. Every morning I unlocked the garden gate with the old brass key. The same one Caroline once accused me of stealing. Residents wandered among Margaret's roses. Some read, some prayed, some simply sat quietly in the sunshine. Watching them reminded me of Walter. Growing older had never frightened him. Being forgotten had. No one here would ever feel forgotten. That became our promise. Nearly a year passed before I saw Caroline again. She arrived alone. No expensive car, no tailored suit, just jeans, a simple sweater, and a hesitant knock on my cottage door. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally. "I wasn't sure you'd see me. I wasn't sure you'd come." She nodded. I almost turned around twice. I believed her. "What can I do for you?" She looked toward the garden. I was hoping... Her voice faltered. I was hoping I could walk through Mom's roses. Not because she wanted ownership. Not because she wanted photographs. Simply because she missed her mother. I reached into my pocket. The brass key felt warm in my hand after all those months. Walter had trusted me with it. Perhaps now, he was asking me to trust someone else. Without a word, I unlocked the gate. Caroline stepped inside slowly. She stopped beside the oldest rose bush and gently touched one bloom. "I haven't been here since before Dad got sick." "I know. I'm ashamed of that." The words came so quietly, I almost didn't hear them. I kept telling myself I'd visit next weekend. She laughed bitterly. There are only so many next weekends before there aren't any left. Neither of us spoke after that. We didn't need to. Some apologies become smaller if they're explained. Others become stronger if they're simply admitted. When we reached Walter's favorite bench, Caroline noticed a bronze plaque mounted beneath it. She knelt to read it. "Care is not measured by blood. It is measured by who stays." Her shoulders trembled. She covered her mouth with one hand. "I never understood him," she whispered. I looked across the garden. "I think he always hoped you eventually would." That afternoon, before leaving, Caroline handed me a small envelope. "I found this while cleaning my house." Inside was a photograph. Walter, Margaret, a much younger Caroline, a little boy I recognized as Ethan. All four of them were laughing in the rose garden. Written across the back, in Walter's familiar handwriting, were 6 simple words. "Home is built one day at a time." I framed the photograph. Not because it belonged to me, because it belonged in the house Walter had saved. Today, it hangs in the entrance hall of the foundation. Every new resident passes it on the way inside. Many stop to look. Some ask who the family is. I always answer the same way. They're the reason this place exists. People still ask whether Walter changed my life. They're wrong. He didn't change it. He reminded me who I had been all along. Someone who believed that ordinary kindness matters, that dignity should never depend on age. That showing up is often the greatest expression of love. His children inherited memories. I inherited a responsibility. And somehow, that became the greatest gift of all. Whenever I walk through Margaret's roses each morning, I still carry the old brass key in my pocket. Not because it opens the garden anymore. The gate is never locked now. I carry it because it reminds me that the most valuable things we leave behind are never houses, or money, or possessions. They're the lives that bloom because we chose to stay. They called me just the caregiver. Walter called me family, in the end. Only one of those voices still mattered.